in community investments. I primarily serve as a program officer for the CHIP, but I also help to coordinate the capacity building efforts that we have. For this year's Lunch and Learn, we're really providing a lot of support with grant making and applying for grants, finding the right opportunities, improving your applications, things like that. In our first Lunch and Learn, we were able to learn a little bit more about the funding landscape from the philanthropic perspective, which really provided us with a nice foundation for thinking about sort of the challenges we're facing in this climate. It was also refreshing and reaffirming to hear that a lot of philanthropy en masse is, continuing to do the work that they're doing and supporting a lot of equity work, a lot of racial equity work, and supporting social determinants of health efforts. So that was great to hear. Today, we're joined by Ellen Weiner, who supports our business development team, who works in our business development team here at HRIA. Really excited to have her walk us through finding the right grant opportunities. And so I'm going to turn it over to her and let her add any more context to her introduction as she'd like and get us started. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jamia. I will share my screen. Okay. So as Jamia said, I'm Ellen Weiner. I'm the Director of Proposal Development here at HRIA, and excited to talk with you about finding the right grants for your initiative. Today we're going to talk about the different types of institutional funders, how to define your funding needs, how to assess your alignment with different funders. We'll go through some basics of prospect research. I'll share resources with you, and then we'll have time for questions. And I understand that you will be given the slides afterwards. I also have a bunch of links to resources in the presentation, which the team can put in the chat, I hope, so that you have access to those right away. Great, thank you. Okay, let's start out by talking about different types of funders. So institutional funders fall into three main buckets: foundations, corporations, and government agencies. And within foundations, there are different types of foundations. There are private foundations, which are those that you're probably most familiar with. And some of these may have started as small family foundations and then expanded over time to move beyond families. And some of those that you might know of are the Barr Foundation, Massachusetts, or on a national level, like the Ford and MacArthur Foundations. Most of these do have professional staffs, and sometimes they won't, though. It really varies. Family foundations are also private foundations. They're often small. They are still kind of closely held by one family. You'll see that their trustee list is generally either all or mostly family members. And so their priorities are closely tied to that family's interests. You may see some giving for different family members' alma maters, for example. And those, a couple that you might be familiar with in Massachusetts, that fund in Massachusetts, are the Cabot Family Charitable Trust and the Roy A. Hunt Foundation, are just two examples. Then we have community foundations, which is basically what that says, is that they're foundations that are established to serve the needs of a particular community. And oftentimes the name of the foundation will tell you exactly who they serve, such as the Boston Foundation or the Community Foundation of Western Mass. It's the geography is right there in their name. Moving on to corporations, there are, of course, national corporations and more locally based corporations. In either case, the corporation will be giving to communities where they have locations and where their employees live and work. Corporations oftentimes, not always, but often give through two different buckets of funding. They'll have philanthropic dollars, which they may establish actually corporate foundations to give through, such as the Liberty Mutual Foundation or the Bank of America Charitable Foundation. And then they also have marketing dollars. And these two different buckets of money sometimes go towards different aims. One is grants and the other is sponsorship, such as an event sponsorship. And we can talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Then we have government agencies, which start at the federal level, go down to state, county, and then municipalities. As you know, not too much activity at the federal level right now, unfortunately. So people are going to be looking much more to state and local sources. Then I wanted to talk about what motivates each type of funder. Foundations, just like your nonprofit organization, have missions, and they're looking to see if your organization, the work that you do, and your mission are aligned with their mission. Corporations, on the other hand, are looking to advance their business strategy. They want to gain visibility, both through those philanthropic grants and also through the marketing dollars, the event sponsorships, and other types of marketing opportunities. One example might be like a big check presentation with a photo opportunity. And then that photo gets shared through their social media, your social media, and newsletters, websites, etc. So that helps them gain visibility. Government agencies are looking to advance legislative, regulatory, and policy mandates. And as we know, these change with each administration. So before you even begin your prospect research, it's important to define your organization's funding needs. And these three areas, your target population, your geographic region, the programs and services that you offer, are key to understanding whether you're going to align with different funders. Your target population, you know who you serve. You may define that by age, by race or ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, etc. You may also serve a specific population, such as veterans or people with disabilities. So knowing who you serve, and you may have multiple programs within your organizations that serve different target populations, but knowing that helps you assess your alignment. Geographic reach is super important in the world of fundraising. Foundations and, as I said, corporations, they're really specific about where they fund. They will usually define that very specifically. One example in Massachusetts is the Irene and George Davis Foundation that funds in Hampton County, Mass. So clearly, if you're located in Hampton County and you're serving people in Hampton County, you may be a match for them. But one interesting situation that comes up is that maybe your organization is located in a different county. Maybe you're, say, in Middlesex County, but you're providing services to people who live in Hampton County. That's an interesting situation. Sometimes funders will spell that out in their guidelines, whether that's you would be eligible. If not, I would suggest checking in with a funder, sending an email or other type of contact just to see whether you might be eligible for their funding. Programs and services. You need to know what it is you're providing, a budget for each program, goals and outcomes for each program, and ways to measure those outcomes. Those are really important. Funders will ask about that in the application questions. I always tell my clients, don't twist yourself into a pretzel just to get funding. Do what you do and what you do well. And if it doesn't match with a funder, move on. Going further in assessing your alignment with the funder, we're going to consider all those things that we just talked about, but also look to make sure, first of all, that your organization is eligible to receive a grant from this funder. Most funders will specify that they're only going to give grants to 501c3 nonprofit organizations. So right off the bat, they'll say that they won't fund individuals, like sometimes students are looking for scholarships. Often that's not available through foundations. More and more, though, I am seeing opportunities for organizations, some of which are smaller and don't yet have their 501c3 from the IRS to work through a fiscal sponsor. Which is great. That's just kind of opening up opportunities for other organizations to apply for funding. Look for any limitations that the funder may specify. For example, sometimes they'll say there's certain things they won't support, like films or conferences or religious organizations or political lobbying. So just make sure that you're aligned with that. They also sometimes talk about budget size of the organization. For example, a funder may say, we're really focused on small to mid-sized organizations. We're not going to fund anyone who has an organization budget size over, say, $1 million or $2 million. So if you're over that, you're not a match. They may also limit the types of expenses that their funding can support. For example, some will support general operating support grants. Some won't, some want program-specific grants. And some will say they don't support like travel expenses, or some will even say they won't support staff salaries. So you just have to be careful and make sure that the request that you're putting in aligns with those limitations. Areas of interest is the big thing that you want to make sure that you match on. This is what the funder will spell out. These are the types of issues that we're interested in supporting. They may say we are interested in supporting K-12 education or workforce development for 16 to 24-year-olds, and we don't support the arts, so those are the types of things that you have to look for. What is my organization doing? What are the specific programs I need funding for? And do they align with the funder's areas of interest? Geography and target population, as we already talked about, are really important limiters, and you'll know pretty much right away whether you're matching on those. Grant size is also something to look at. You may have a funder who does relatively small grants, like $5,000 to $10,000 grants, and you may need to raise $500,000 or $1 million for your program. And you may say to yourself, I know I'm going to have to raise money from multiple sources, but maybe this size grant isn't worth my time and effort. That's just a determination that each organization needs to make. You may put a kind of a floor on what you're going for. You may say, I'm really only going to look at opportunities that are 25,000 and above. If you can look at a list of their past grantees, there's a wealth of information there that will tell you who they've given to and often what the grant size is. Sometimes funders make this information available right on their own website, which is great. Sometimes we look to other sources like the 990 tax return, which I'll talk about in more detail in a minute. And lastly, make sure that you look at the deadlines, read through the application procedures, and that you make sure that you follow those. There's often no wiggle room with those. So now I want to start to share some research tools with you. And first of all, talk about some free resources that are available. I think that starting with funders' websites is the best source of information. It comes directly from the funder. It's generally the most up-to-date source of information. Not all foundations have them, but more and more do, which is great. And they will give you their grant guidelines right there. If you're looking on a corporation's website for their corporate giving programs, that will take a bit more effort. They may not make that information super easy to find, So you can look for clues like about us or corporate social responsibility or anything with the word community in it. Um, Sometimes those are buzzwords that they use that you can kind of drill down, and sometimes it really takes a bit of effort to get to it. Um, I have had situations where I know a company gives grants, but I can't find anything on their website. And sometimes I'll just do a Google search of, X company corporate giving, and that can sometimes yield results. So that's another strategy there. Um, ProPublica is a great free resource. Their nonprofit explorer makes 990 forms available for free. The 990 is the foundation's tax return, and we'll do a little bit of a closer look in a second, but there's a wealth of information there. Candid.org has uh, a bunch of resources. GuideStar is similar to ProPublica in that you can look up nonprofits and foundations, you can find their tax returns. You can also edit your own nonprofit's entry, which is helpful sometimes because it can help others find you. Um, GuideStar has a free level. They also have a paid access level as well, where you can get access to a bit more information. Candid also has a list of RFPs, which are requests for proposals that funders put out that that's basically the information that you're looking for from a funder is what they want to accept proposals on. Candid also hosts the Foundation Directory, which is a subscription-based resource. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a second. Listservs, I find to be really useful. There's on the right side of the screen, I have a list with links there. So maybe you can put those in the chat. Jimmy or Amanda, thanks. They come to your email inbox every week or sometimes every month. And it's just basically a list of requests for proposals that are out there. These are some that I subscribe to that I find really useful. The City of Boston funding update is not just for the City of Boston, although they do have city-based opportunities. They also have federal, state, and foundation opportunities there. And they aren't just focused on the City of Boston, it's broader for the state. Grant Station Insider is another national resource. The Boston Foundation puts out a nonprofit update. This is monthly, so a little bit less timely, but there are lists, like long lists of RFPs forecast into the future, as well as lots of professional development opportunities and just general news about the sector. Mass Nonprofit News is weekly, again, general news about the sector with RFPs as well. And Candid has an RFP list that you can subscribe to that will be national. They also put out the Philanthropy News Digest, which is more like news and trends in the sector nationally. And it's really can usually be helpful. So here's the 990 that I've been mentioning. It is a foundation's tax return. And just like you, they have to file taxes every year. If you can see the top left part of the screen, there's this kind of general contact information for the funder. This one, I'm not sure if you can see it, is for the Mabel Louise Riley Foundation based in, interestingly, I thought they were based in Boston, but they, according to their tax return, are actually based in Pittsburgh. But they fund in Boston. At the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a list of trustees of the foundation. This is really interesting and useful information if you are, if your organization has, you have your board of directors and you're trying to make connections between the funder and your board to see if anybody knows anyone associated with the foundation. You can also see whether they pay their trustees, which is just kind of interesting to see. Also in the 990 should be the application procedures. So if you're not having any luck finding, if a funder doesn't have a website and they're really kind of invisible, sometimes you can just get those application procedures directly from the 990. But the most important part of the 990 is what's on the right-hand side of the screen, which is the grants list. And this is a list of all the grants paid out during that tax year by that funder. They have differing levels of information, but at the minimum, you should get the grantee's name and the amount of the award. This list is supposed to be included in every tax return. It isn't always, I'm sorry to say. There were a few years where the IRS was really lax about this requirement. We seem to be back on track now, which is great, but sometimes it's missing. And these tax returns are lengthy documents because they foundations have to report on all of their investments. So oftentimes this grant list will be towards the very end of the document. Not always, but often I'll just scroll right to the end and kind of work backwards till I find the list. Sometimes under this column that says purpose of grant, this particular funder has just said general operating for everything. But sometimes they'll give you an actual description of the programs that were funded. And that's great because that helps you consider whether your program is aligned with what they're looking for. The 990 grant list is really, really helpful because it's a double check as to whether the funder is doing what they say they're going to do. Sometimes you'll see a bit of a disconnect between their stated guidelines and what they're actually giving to. So this is a good double check. The other thing that you can look at is if you're really trying to do a deeper dive, you can compare tax returns over a few years, and you can look at their grantee list and see, is it really static? Does it just stay the same over time? Is there any opportunity for new organizations to come in? Or am I seeing different organizations over time where I'm seeing there's an opening? Sometimes, like I said, with those smaller family foundations, you might just see people giving to their alma maters. They're giving to a couple of hospitals. Maybe they're giving to some things that were really personal to people, and there's not a lot of room for anything new. So this is a good way to check that. The issue with the information on the 990 is it's a tax return. So information is not up to the minute. As you know, from filing your taxes, you're looking back on the previous year. By the time, and funders, just like individuals, can file extensions to, for their taxes. So by the time the information gets filed, the IRS processes it, and then it becomes available publicly. Sometimes it's 2 to 3 years old. So take it, understand what you're looking at. Look at that date on the tax return. I'm thrilled nowadays if I can see a 2024 return. That is fantastic. Moving on, here's just a couple of examples of what the listservs look like. The one from Camden on the left, like I said, is a national list of funding opportunities. So you're going to want to zero in on that geography right away to see if there's anything in your area. And you can click through to get more information. The one on the right is from the city of Boston. This is older, I see, but they do start typically with federal, then go to state, local, and then they also have foundation listings after that. And then here is a list of some of the main subscription-based research tools for prospecting. The foundation directory, as I said, is hosted by candid.org. That is considered by many in the field to be kind of the gold standard, if you will. And I'll just back up and say that for all of these tools, their information will still come from those 990 tax returns, which are available to you for free. The benefit, what you're paying for, is the ability to set up search criteria that match your funding needs. And that can save you a lot of time, be a lot more efficient than just kind of, poking around and looking for foundations. So the foundation directory is, as I said, they do have a free version. It's very, very limited. Um, these basic rates ranging from $37 a month to $220 a month are for one user. And that's based, I think, on budget size, and the rates increase for multiple users. I believe, Jamia, you asked me this question, that you can share the cost between more than one organization for this subscription. But before you go ahead and do that, please confirm with them and make sure that that's true. Impala is a newer tool that was developed locally in the Boston area, but it does have a national reach. They have a free version called Essentials, which, definitely try it out. It gives you a good idea of what that tool is like to use. And then a premium level access subscription is $5,000 a year. I believe that's a flat rate. They may offer discounts for smaller nonprofits, so you can check with them. But you can, try it out for free. Another type of prospecting tool is Instrumental, is one example of this, because it's, in addition to being a prospecting tool, it also will provide grants management services for you. So when you win a grant, or when you even apply and maybe you're declined, this helps track all your proposal activity over time, and that can be very useful. And that just kind of depends on the level of proposals that you're putting out there and the size of your organization as to whether you need something like that. They do offer a 14-day free trial, and then their cost is, it's higher because it's a higher level tool. But I definitely want to put in a plug for Philanthropy Mass. They are a membership organization both for funders and also for nonprofit organizations. They do offer some limited free resources, but they make nonprofit memberships available at pretty reasonable rate. It's a sliding scale based on your organization's budget size, and it starts at $125 a year. The benefits of membership do include access to the foundation directory, the one that we talked about. You do have to make an appointment to use it, so you have to book it on their calendar. You get access to their RFP listings, which are really good, and they're definitely statewide. They keep them up to date. They also offer a 10% discount off of an Impala subscription. Additionally, to help you define your search criteria for your prospecting, you can book, if you're a member, a one-on-one session with one of their research specialists, which can be a really useful tool. So that is my presentation there, and I'd love to pause here, and I'll stop sharing so that we can take questions, hear your thoughts.
Please feel free to raise your hand or drop a question in the chat.
Thank you, Ellen, for that presentation. Some of us do work with like churches, and I know that finding grants that are grantors that will fund religious institutions are harder to find. And I don't know if you could point us in that direction, just so we have something in the toolkit to offer or faith-based organizations as we're having conversations with them and learning about some of the needs that they might have.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. What I have found is that sometimes funders are, they'll say, like I said, we don't fund religious institutions. However, they are sometimes amenable to funding specific programs that a church or other religious institution may be running. For example, if you had like a program that was run at a church but served the broader population. Maybe you're providing free meals, or some educational programming or workforce development programming, but it's not specifically limited to, say, members of a particular faith. Sometimes funders are more open to that. So I think that's a conversation that you can have. And if your organization is not a religious organization, if the religious organization is a partner of yours and your organization is the applicant organization, that's usually okay.
Okay,
So I hope
thank
that's
you.
helpful.
Yep,
Sure.
it is.
Good.
Thank you, Alicia. Jason?
Yeah, thanks so much. This was so informative, and I really was fascinated by how you recommended going through the funders, potential funders 990. I wonder though, if you are the funder and you're sitting on the other end of the table and you're doing that research on a potential awardee, what are you looking at along those lines that's sort of outside of what's included on the proposal?
Yeah, that's a great thing to raise because most times grant applications now, the funder will ask you to submit your organization's 990 as an attachment. They'll ask for your audited financial statements if you have those. They want budgets, they want an organization budget, a program budget. I think it depends on the funder, how closely they're looking at financials. Um, as you know, I'm sure and can imagine that it is a very competitive world out there in terms of accessing funding. And so some funders are really looking for clues in those financial documents as to whether the organization is well managed, what they're sometimes they will ask you flat out, do you have cash assets for up to 6 months? They really they want to invest in well-run organizations. So I think those financials are important, and it's important to have all your documents ready and keep your documents up to date.
Thanks for your question, Jason. And I would also just add, there's like an assessment of risk as the amount of money increases. So you're more likely to have to submit those type of documents or get that level of review for a larger amount of resources. I would wonder if someone asking for, 25 or $20,000, if they would need all of those documents. So I think we're trying to do definitely more equitable practices as grant makers. And I don't think the risk is worth it to sort of investigate that deeply if it's for a smaller amount of money.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point to me. I am constantly amazed by particularly banks. Banks, you can imagine, they're coming from financial world. They want the moon for sometimes $5,000. And so this is where you really do need to assess, is this worth our time and effort? If you're applying for grants on a regular basis, you have these documents in order, and it's really no big deal to upload them to a funder's portal. But I think in this world where we're talking a lot about trust-based philanthropy and trying to ease the burden of grant applications on nonprofits, sometimes funders talk the talk, they don't walk the walk. It's just hopefully we're moving in a better direction. But for the most part, they really want all those financials. And if you're a fiscally sponsored organization, they want them for your fiscal sponsor.
Thanks for that question, Jason. I'm also going to point us to some questions in the chat. Andra asks, what's the best way to tell if a foundation is interested in funding program evaluations?
That's a good question. I don't think that you would see that typically spelled out in funders' guidelines. However, funders are increasingly interested in how you evaluate your programs, how you measure success, what those indicators are, and how you measure them. And so I think if you have a program where if you, for example, if you wanted to contract with an external evaluator to evaluate that initiative, you could build that into your budget as a program expense. But that's a really interesting question to have a conversation with a funder about before you apply, if you can do that, if they're open to such a conversation. And that really depends on the funder and possibly an existing relationship you have with them.
To that point, as a follow-up, would you suggest any of the types of funders that some of which you've already stated that might be more amenable to having the deeper discussion about also funding evaluation components, because sometimes maybe the initial funding isn't sufficient.
Yep.
How might you go about reaching out to people for that specific evaluation component?
Yeah, and my answer is it really depends. I can't say that, X type of foundation might be more open. I would say in general, a community foundation would be more open to a conversation. However, a lot of that is dependent on their staff capacity. Sometimes they just don't have it. They're also dealing, with small staff sometimes. And that's really on a case by case basis. It's hard to know, but you can always try. I don't think it hurts to try to reach out.
We have another question in the chat from
Yeah.
Julia. Would you advise a nonprofit to ask for a phone call with the funder to explore future funding instead of waiting only for what they sent out? If it is a yes, any tips on how we can prep themselves, but also if no, can you maybe share why it's not a good way to go? I'll also say that we're also having another session on how to chat with funders in the future, so that
Yeah.
there will be more to come on that, but also, go ahead, Elle.
Yeah, that's great. I think sometimes you can tell from the funder's website, from their guidelines. Sometimes they will say flat out, we don't talk to people until we have a proposal in hand. This is where, if you have any way of making a connection where you can use your board members, you can look at their trustee list, their staff list. If anybody has a connection, use LinkedIn. This is a great way to be able to reach out and build a relationship, because it really is all about relationship building in the end. It is competitive out there. You can have an amazing program doing fantastic work and still have trouble getting funding because somebody else has a relationship with that funder. Reaching out through an email contact first might be a good way to go. Phone calls, certainly, if you're able to get that information. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. And in terms of preparing yourself, I think you need to have if you're able to have a phone call, have a quick pitch. Same thing with an email. This is not the place to put multiple paragraphs about what you do. This is the place to try to pique someone's interest in 1 or 2 sentences and ask if you might have a conversation with them. So be prepared. Be prepared to answer those questions and make sure that you've really read everything that the funder puts out there, and as well as doing your research on who they've funded. That's another thing you can do, is if you look at a list of their grantees and you say, oh, I know the person who runs that organization, they might be willing to have a conversation with you about their relationship with that funder. That's another possible source of information, but sometimes you have to tread lightly on those too, because those are their relationships and their funding sources. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you for that question, Juliet. Do any others have any questions? Raise your hand or come off mute. Love to hear from you. Okay, well. All right, I think I gave it enough time, but yeah, feel free to reach out directly to me after this if something does come up. Yeah, thank you so much, Ellen. This has been really helpful. I also liked the reviewing the tax form component. I think that's something that I don't think people know enough about that as a way to see if this is the right kind of funder. So I really appreciated the details that you provided and really great tips. Um, before we go, we do have a quick survey. If we want to launch that, please take a few minutes to complete this. It should only take about less than 5 minutes, if you guys can do that. Thank you guys for completing this. I'm also going to share some future oops. Now I can't find the slide deck. Nope, I'm in the slide deck though.
Oh, do I need to do anything?
I don't know what I just did. Did I delete it? Oh, no. Oh, there we go. I think my computer was just being strange.
I can share if you want to, me for that last slide.
Sure, I found it finally.
Oh, okay.
Actually, we're good. Oop. I think it just. Okay, there we go. So we just also wanted to remind you of some upcoming learning opportunities. Our next learning community is next Wednesday from 10 to 12. We'll be continuing our discussions around campaign planning for capturing the impact of the funds in the last 5 years. We'll be talking more specifically about audiences and messaging. And then our next Lunch and Learn, which will focus on grant writing and making applications stand out, will be on May 21st, May 21st from 11 to 12. And for those of you who are in cohort 1 or 2, the PSE approaches report and inventory tool is due today. So please be sure to finalize that. Reach out to your program officers if you have any specific questions. And as a reminder, that's only for cohort 1 and 2, not cohort 3. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Enjoy.